This is going to go live on all the social media. So may I request you to kindly put your mobile phones in the silent mode or switch them off ideally. This is the second event on Myanmar we are having at the FCC. We are delighted to welcome Mint, who was a member of the FCC many years ago, and he went back to his country and is running this Mizima, very successful media group. And we invite the lady and Anshman also. May I request my colleague Simran to introduce them? Thank you.
We have with ourselves Mint. I hope I pronounced your name correct. He's founder, editor in chief of Mizima Media Group in Myanmar. He's also an award winning journalist and a business owner who has worked in the media industry since 1992 in different capacities. He founded Mizima in New Delhi, India in 1998. Mizima broadcasts and publishes independent news, information, and entertainment. And Mint is a regular speaker and invited guest at forums on media in Myanmar and currently also serves as chairperson for the Media Development Committee of Burma News International. He is currently in India to brief media, political parties, and think tanks which focus on Myanmar. We also have with us Nui Ni Win. She is a Myanmar national and she escaped to India, that is Mizoram, from Myanmar with her three children in April of 2021. She has been living in Delhi since November 2021 and is registered with the UNHCR as an asylum seeker. She holds a graduate degree in psychology from the Yangon Dagon University and she has also taught there. At present, she is working on a research project which looks at the refugee conditions of Chins living in Vikaspuri, Delhi. With us, we have Anshuman Chaudhary. He is a New Delhi based researcher and writer from Assam. He is currently an associate fellow at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. He has been a senior researcher at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies also, and he regularly writes on Myanmar and Indian politics. And we welcome all of you today with us for a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Simran. Myanmar is a close neighbor of India, but unfortunately, it has been under military rule for more than 6 decades. I must narrate an experience I had during my first visit to Myanmar more than 10 years ago. From the airport, I was driving to my hotel, and we were passing by Aung San Suu Kyi's lakeside home. So the driver, my taxi driver, told me that Aung San Suu Kyi lives here. So I said, please stop the vehicle. I want to get out and take some pictures. So there was panic in his face. He said, sir, that's not a good idea. I said, why do you say that? He says, can you see that armed guard with a gun? He is looking at us already. If I stop the car and if you get down from the car and take a picture or something, he will simply shoot both of us down. No questions asked. So let us just move away. So that was a scene more than 10 years ago. Things have not changed in that country. Again, there was a coup d'etat, and Aung San Suu Kyi was a democratically elected leader of that country. She was toppled on the 1st of February 2021. And there has been a lot of massive oppressive rule in that country. And I understand that at least 43% of that country's territory is now under the rebels' control. But the army is not giving up. On Friday, they attacked a Rohingya village in Rakhine state. I think some 10 people died. And the UN Secretary General expressed his concern and appealed to people not to indulge in oppressive actions, and he suggested that there should be discussions between the rebel groups and the military regime. Let us know from Somint and the lady about what is going on in that country at this point of time. So,
Thank you, President Mr. Venkat. First of all, for welcoming me here again. I was a member of the club until 2011. I was in the CC of the club, and this basically was my second home. Uh, because I grew up in India, as many of you knew. Uh, when I was 21 years old, that was how I came to India in 1990. In 2011, I returned to Myanmar to contribute to a democratic process which was limited, but as an independent media, Mizima contributed to the process. And now I'm here again. Uh, I think I will be traveling, coming often to India, basically to engage and have discussions more in future. I'd like to start with, I mean, you know about Myanmar, I mean, probably a lot already from the media. For me, Burma, Myanmar will never be the same. It's not the same and will never be the same as it was before 2021. I will never be the same as it was before 2021. Myanmar will never be the same as it was before 2021. Myanmar military will never be the same as it was 2021. Ethnic nationalities, either you talk of Rakhine or Chin or Shan, or will never be the same as it was not before 2021. National League for Democracy will never be the same. So we have, and we are uh, entering into a future which is very much uncertain. We don't know what the future is. Today's title is What Next in Myanmar. I don't know, to simply put it that way. What I know is in the last 3 years, when there were protests, peaceful protests, particularly led by the young people who felt their rights, limited rights, were taken away suddenly, either their internet rights or their limited freedom of speech, that was taken suddenly in the morning of 1st February 2021. And that changed their life. They led the peaceful protest, and it was in 1988, but this time was different. The situation was different. The environment was different. Myanmar military didn't need to do this coup. It was enjoying its its rights within their own constitution of 2008. It had veto power for appointing three important ministers: defense minister, home minister, border affairs minister. So in the cabinet, even led by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, popular government, the three key portfolios were appointed by the commander-in-chief. Myanmar military have 25% of parliamentarians appointed in the parliament from the military. They didn't need to do this, but they did it, and it changed everything. It, we are not. I don't think Myanmar, Burma is going to go back to the situation before 2021. That have a lot of impact on individuals, institutions, nationalities, armed groups, and the country itself. Today, I can show you. I have slides, but I will just give you facts. Today, more than 40% of country's territories are active fighting. That means under the control and under the uh, uh, administration in many areas of this of different resistant groups. More than 600 armed groups have emerged in the last 3 years, newly emerged, more than apart from existing ones that were there before 2021. More than 30,000 armed clashes have happened in the whole country from 1st February to now. And population, if you look at the population, Myanmar has about 50 plus, 52, 54, 55. I mean, depending on the census of who did. And half of the country's populations are in need of food and medicines. More than 2.5 millions. That doesn't include 1.3 millions of refugees and asylum seekers, like people like us. They are displaced. They have to leave their native place. They have to leave their homes. But in 1988, when young students like me left the country, I left alone. But now families leave the places. Families. It is families leaving. Students, young students, if you look at the flight from Yangon to Bangkok, every day people are leaving their country. That people include all walks of life, young students, activists, media, NGOs, business people. Many young or many business have set up in Thailand. Burmese are the second most who bought condo in Thailand nowadays because they are different. They have their profession, they have their money, so they are just leaving their country. So what is going to happen? We have seen the central authority in Naypyidaw going down, gradually going down in the last 3 years. No center as such as it used to be. We have seen and we were likely to see more of emerging powers, regional powers within these boundaries of whatever you call it, Burma, Myanmar. If you look at Rakhine today, at least I can say half of the country, Rakhine's areas are not under the control of Myanmar military. Just 2 days ago, in Sittwe district, there are three townships were already captured by the Arakan army. Only Sittwe is left alone. The same thing happened in other parts of the country, in Kachin state, Karen state. So that is that. The issue is what all this will lead to. That is one question. That is what the title is, what next in Myanmar. Another one is the impact of what is happening in Myanmar, inside Myanmar. It is crossing the border. It is now it is Myanmar's problem is now regional problem. Myanmar's problem is international problem. We have that Nguyen Nguyen will spell it out. We have 6,000 Burmese in Delhi alone. We have more than 60,000 Burmese taking shelter in Mizoram in Northeast. And same thing, we have 6 millions, 5 to 6 millions Burmese in Thailand. Now, particularly this conscript the young people, because it is expensive for them now even to go to Thailand. So they are coming now. What they are coming to Laos, they are going to Cambodia. So that has have a lot of impact in the countries, particularly in the region. So what can we do? I don't know. What can we do? Of course, I think at least we can report about this. We can report of the ground situation, what is happening in different parts of the country, and hopefully there will be attempts to sort of unite the country or the nation. If you look at the Myanmar today, there are different groupings of armed resistance groups which are united fighting against the military, like northern the groups in northern part of Myanmar, the groups bordering with in Thailand, the groups bordering with India. They are united in their own ways fighting against the Myanmar military. So the question is, will they be united to establish a grouping or establish a future united Burma Myanmar? That is a question, and I think we can discuss more about this as we move. So I will stop here. Basically, what I want to stress is I think the, the least we could do is one, to alleviate the suffering of the peoples, pains and some, particularly the young people who just lost their dreams and hope right after COVID or during this, just right up, they had hopes that after COVID they will do this, they will do that. All these dreams were washed away. So at least we could do something to alleviate the suffering and pains, particularly the young people who are future. Plus, I think we could all work to find solutions or alternative in Burma, Myanmar. But that is to be definitely very clear. It has to be a democratic, it has to be a federal, genuine federal setup. Otherwise, we have been in this cycle of one coup after another in the last 7 decades. So I will stop here.
May I now invite the lady? She's living in Delhi with three of her children, and she is seeking asylum as a refugee. Let us listen to her story, please.
Hello, thank you so much, Mr. President, for giving me this very opportunity to share about our lives, which is currently vulnerable, even both in our own country back in Myanmar as well as in India. Um, Let me just begin introducing myself so that you know about me in a better way. My name is Cynthia Nguyen. I'm single mom, and I was not really political woman. I was just a woman who had 21 sons, foster sons who had no chance to study, unprivileged children, and I was a counselor among the women in Rangoon. But as the military coup today elected leaders and doing all sorts of brutal action and that our life was threatened, then that's what the reason we have to flee from our country to escape from the brutal military action. We don't know if we will be raped or detained and put into prisons. And in that very conditions, I was forced to leave to India. And after arriving in India, New Delhi, and I approached UNHCR as a slum seeker, and I got registrations. And after that, I found many of my Chin community, environment community as a refugee in Myanmar who before 2001 or even after 2001 were so much depressed because they were blocked many years without receiving any exit permit from FRRO. And as a woman, even though I'm single mom, I could not just sit back in the room. But I found that dream led me to be a chain maker in the refugee community itself. And gradually, I started this peaceful demonstration in front of UNHCR. I was one of the leaders who made a demonstration in front of UNHCR since 2021 after I arrived in New Delhi up till 2023 June 20 on Refugee Date. And the other way is I just involved with the Burmese women refugee and as violence against women in church. And because I found out that our girls are not safe in the community and they need help. And then another thing, I also involved in the research of Asia Pacific Refugee Right Network, and one of the founder came to the among this refugee community and assist her for their research, for 2 month research. And then as well as in summer holiday, like in during the summer vocational training, I give like Burmese letter. I mean, Burmese language with kids who might know Burmese language, and I took them. I mean, I had a class for them at the vocational training class, Burmese class. And then the other one is as gradually I involved in different way. And right now, I as a sources, I work with the Indian institutes, social institutes, and doing some research among the refugee community, which is based on the people who live in Vikaspuri, Budila. So that's how I involve in different ways that we might our voice might be heard. And I feel very privileged today that I get a chance this very platform. I don't know what's going to happen as a result, but I took it as a chance, a great chance to raise our voice, especially for refugee in Delhi. So as we know, refugees from Myanmar are located in northeast India. Largest number are in Mizoram and followed by Manipur, Nagaland. All three states share a border with Myanmar. But I'm going to speak specifically about Myanmar refugee here in Delhi, about those of us who have sought protection of UNHCR. Almost 79,000 Myanmar refugee and asylum seekers are living in India as of June 2023, according to data from UNHCR. And it includes Rohingya, a stateless Muslim minority who largely flee Myanmar in 2017 to escape military crackdown. The first problem is that India has been reluctant to recognize the people fleeing persecution from brutal army rule as a refugee and insists on calling us as illegal migrants. Many have detained and some have been we heard of being deported even though their lives has been at risk in Myanmar. And nearly many of Myanmar nationals have been arrested and detained as of February 2024 in Manipur. But as I do not know the exact figure. And since India does not recognize refugee and it no longer recognizes even UNHCR card as a refugee from Myanmar, live in constant fear of arrest, detention, and deportation against their will. I am not sure how many of those arrested are Rohingya. Rohingya face many problems, and I am not speaking of them as I work mainly with Chin refugee and Burman refugee from Myanmar. The first problem we face is totally uncertainty about our future and the future of our children. We have no identity cards. Those who have illegal Aadhaar card are aware that if they get caught at any time, they could end up in jail. And once in jail, they may have to spend time even after sentence because they do not have any identity proved. For most of us, we cannot go to Myanmar embassy. And so we have really no security at all here in New Delhi and even in India. Second, since we do not have any residential permit or a long-term visa as previous refugee had, we cannot really do anything to earn a living. Under Indian law, we can only do manual jobs. For instance, for example, UNHCR offered me a job of selling ice cream at the shop, which require more than 10 hours of my time, and I have to travel about 2 hours to get the salary about only 10,000 rupee or 15,000. And beside, the challenges is I have to leave my three kids who are underage, and the youngest one is 530. Yeah, I mean five and a half years old. I'm sorry for that. And the other hand, we without Aadhaar card, we cannot open bank account. We cannot work at a place where they pay a check or direct money transfer. We cannot admit our children into schools. We cannot get admission into educational institutions. We cannot access medical insurance. We cannot get a driving license. We cannot get police verification when we rent apartment. Under these circumstances, our children are not able to get proper schooling. Some of the refugee works in a small factories and salary is much below minimum wages. And the men get about 7,000, the woman gets about 5,000, but they have to work about more than 10 hours. And the condition in which we find ourselves deprives our life as well as our dignity. And we are forced to break the law, which we really don't want to do. And that makes us more vulnerable. And in Manipur, many have got arrested for having illegal Aadhaar cards. The UNHCR too has stopped many of the facility they used to provide before. First of all, they take years before they recognize refugee, and I myself have got Aslam card more than 2 years been, but not yet recognized as a refugee. And this impedes the resettlement process, that slow down the resettlement process. And second, they do not provide financial assistance as they used to before. Third, they have stopped even giving free rations. Sometimes what they provide is very much inadequate for the family. The UNHCR does not provide interpreter for refugee trying to access medical facility as they did in the past. The UNHCR has alliance with NGOs and their funding has been cut. You must have heard about that. Um, as a result, medical, educational facilities have been adversely affected. The UNHCR has threatened refugee with arrest or not giving refugee recognized card if they demonstrate outside the office in Visan Vihar. And they are not accessible for most of us. And they cut off their phone number and even office number, the office number, UNHCR office number, which is located in Visan Vihar. Fortunately, some refugees who are living in Mizoram, Manipur, and other borders, they had no chance for having registration with UNHCR because UNHCR is located in New Delhi. And to travel far from there to here, there are many people in between who caught up in prison. Even many of Myanmar refugees are in Guwahati they try to approach to UNHCR here to seek the protection, but they were caught. And now, after sentence being more than 1 year, they are in now right now in detention center. So those sad things happened. And therefore, I would like to appeal to the international community through these foreign correspondents to take some urgent steps to address the problem of refugee from Myanmar, especially who are in India. Thank you so much.
May I now invite Anshuman? He has been following the developments in Myanmar for a long time. He writes for the Hindustan Times. And Anshuman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Naran, for inviting me to this panel. Very honored to be sharing this panel with So and Nue. And just to start, they are best placed to talk about what's happening as people who are directly affected. And you've just heard how horrifying the situation in Myanmar is, including the situation with the people who have been forced to move out. I think Nue, what you said brings out also the gendered aspect of how women asylum seekers are disproportionately affected. You, as a mother of three children, have additional costs, opportunity costs of looking after your children while managing to make ends meet. So I am just a third-party observer who's been following Myanmar for about, I think, 7 years now. So take all my comments in that context. But I am also particularly interested, have been writing particularly on India's policy on Myanmar, which is what I'm going to mostly talk about today. But before that, I think I want to use the title of this panel to start. You know, control. Uh, I think the title itself needs to be questioned, anyways. Few things in the title. and I hope you don't mind me doing that, which is 43%, the figure. Um, some would say it's higher, is all I can say. There are different estimates. It depends on how you gauge control, how you understand what is control. The SACM, which is Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, which is a group which was formed around 2 years ago by former diplomats, including a retired UN Special Envoy, Yang Lee, puts the percentage of stable junta control in Myanmar as of September 2022 at just 17%. And I say stable control, which means effective control, continuous control. I can assure you that number has further decreased over the last 1.5 years. So I'm not quite sure about the 43%. Uh, Even more so because we need to define what is control. As I just said, there are many ethnic armed organizations, which are also now known as EROs, ethnic revolutionary organizations, who have been actually controlling their areas, have their own administration, social service, public service delivery, even before the coup, and now they have just consolidated that control. There are areas where there are junta troops stationed, but are attacked almost every day, and they are forced to push back. So we've got to understand what kind of degree of control. And that SSCM report, I encourage all of you to read it. It actually maps control according to the different degrees and categories of control. It's very useful to understand what's happening in Myanmar today. So that needs to be put in context. Thirdly, the word rebel. Um, I mean, I understand why one uses it, but I think this what's happening in Myanmar today is not a rebellion. It's not a random rebellion group of armed groups just attacking a state's army. How I see it is as a very sophisticated and comprehensive movement to build a new country, right? And that's why the word revolution is used. And the word revolution, I feel, in Myanmar's context, is not just an emotive term. It is a very specific, even academic term, because what what the pro-democracy side is seeking today is a total overhaul of the system in Myanmar, which is they're not seeking a reformation of the military. They're seeking an elimination of the military and replacement of the military with a whole new military. That is revolution in the truest sense of the term, which is replacing complete replacement of the current system with a new system. And one phrase which is absolutely critical to this very sophisticated and multi-layered experiment, not even experiment, a movement, is the Federal Democratic Union, right? I think it's not just about restoring democracy anymore, but it's about building a genuinely federal democracy. And that is where I think Myanmar looks to India as not just the region's largest democracy, but also the region's largest federal democracy. I think the structure that India has is an inspiration to the people of Myanmar in terms of the federal devolution of power and the autonomy that states have, in particularly, the kind of exclusive autonomy that many tribal-dominated states in the Northeast have. Um, Although we could have an entirely separate debate out of the remit of this panel on the health of federalism in today's India, but that's a different discussion. But in itself, the model is what, in my conversations with many young Burmese activists, they've always told me that we look up to India as not just as a democracy, as I said, but a federal democracy. So I think India needs to recognize that advantage that it has in the region, and act accordingly, right? And I've been writing this since day one of the coup, which is that India's decision to formally engage with the junta is probably understandable in the sense of a realpolitik kind of foreign policy, but to me, as an objective analyst, it doesn't make any sense. And why I'll say that, it's not just an abstract argument that I'm making. There are two reasons why I say that. Number one is, of course, the most obvious reason. We are dealing with a regime in Myanmar that has a pathological disregard for human life. And it has shown that repeatedly, and not just since the 2021 coup. We cannot talk about what's happening in Myanmar without talking about what happened to the Rohingyas in 2017. And absolutely, we cannot talk about a new Myanmar without talking about the position of the Rohingya in that new Myanmar. Today, we see the NUG making a genuine effort in many ways. We could debate the genuineness of that effort, but there is an effort to include the Rohingya within the political mainstream, national political mainstream. But the Rohingya, we should remember, are placed in a very, very sensitive context where it's not just the NUG which is operating. There's the Arakan army also, right? And as Mr. Naran mentioned, 2 days ago there was a massive airstrike in one of the Rohingya neighborhoods. Actually, some reports say 25 were killed. I saw some visuals yesterday. I think I lost my sleep. Some babies were butchered. Their heads were split open. It's almost like the second genocide they're going through after 2017, right? So that's one thing. That's one thing that we should always talk about when we talk about Myanmar. Um, so we are dealing with a regime which is so brutal that there are no words to describe it. The airstrike in Paziji in Sagaing last year was horrifying. I think 130 people died immediately. So that is one reason why India would not, I argue, work with such a regime. There are certain red lines. I understand realpolitik, foreign policy. I understand national interests. But there is a red line in every foreign policy, I believe. And the red line, the junta has shown that red line repeatedly. The second reason, which is even if we ignore the first reason, which many would call an idealistic fantasy, that foreign policy doesn't work like this. Let's ignore that. The second reason is why India shouldn't work with the SSA is because the SSA is not a partner of India. It is not a force that can ensure the protection of Indian interests in Myanmar. Since the coup, all of India's investments have stalled. The Kaladan multimodal project has stalled. The India-Myanmar trilateral highway has stalled. None of this would have happened if the SEC, if the junta wouldn't have launched the coup or attempted to launch the coup in 2021. Everything was going fine. Delhi had built a great momentum with the Aung San Suu Kyi government. It was very steadily expanding its investment portfolio, building schools, clinics, agrarian rice centers, and whatnot. Very people-centric investments. Now we see all of that, fallen into the pit, right? So that number two, India is very concerned about the border, the 1643-kilometer long border. But Delhi seems to believe that it's only by working with the Myanmar military it can secure the border. Nothing can be further away from that truth. Today, if you look at the border, just look at the entire border and who controls that border. It's not the Myanmar military. In Chin is the Chin National Army, the CNDF, the CDFs. In Rakhine, northern Rakhine, is the Arakan Army. In fact, the Arakan Army is also in Paletwa, which is southern Chin state. In Sagaing, these are the large group of PDFs, People's Defense Forces, who are controlling the border regions. So it's not the SSC that are controlling the border region. In fact, the military has been directly arming anti-India insurgent groups who are stationed in Sagaing region. Organized within the Manipuri anti-India insurgent groups organized within the Core Command, which is known as the Core Command, UNLF, PLA, KYKL, etc. There is evidence to suggest that the Kalay Regional Command, Tactical Regional Command, directly supports these guys who are sitting there. So my argument is that the Myanmar military is inimical to Indian interests. It's high time India realizes that. I think that Delhi is realizing that slowly and steadily, especially since October, when Operation 1027 began, which was a coordinated offensive along the Myanmar border, and then had ripple effects across the western border. The Rikhodar border crossing point from Zokathal is also under CNF control now, right? So the Paletwa area is also under AA control, joint AA and partly under CNF control. Paletwa is where the Kaladan project's inland river terminal is. It's from where the road to Mizoram starts. You recently must have seen the Mizo MP K Valnalvena meet members of the Arakan army. So there are signs that Delhi is realizing that things are shifting, the ground reality is shifting. Probably too late, but again, never too late. I would seriously, sincerely take this platform to urge the government of India to immediately diversify its relationships and work with these groups along the border to secure its own interests, number one, but also number two, which India should have done before. And I've argued for this, which is work towards opening a humanitarian corridor. So many people are affected along the border. People are being displaced. They have no food. They have no medicines. This is India's opportunity to show to the Myanmar people that they care about the people of Myanmar. And the Indian government has been saying that in all its statements, that whatever we do is for the people of Myanmar. So it only makes sense to do that. India should work with a large set of partners to do that. And Thailand is doing that, although there are issues with Thailand's approach to working with the SEC, etc. But at least there's an attempt. So India should also work towards opening humanitarian corridors to help people in Chin and Sagaing particularly. Number three, India's Myanmar policy predominantly, I would say unfortunately in many ways, is guided by this paranoia around China. That it's the Chinese ingress that we need to counterbalance in Myanmar. Understandable, because that's how geopolitics and geostrategy works, right? But my point is that India needs to show that it is not China. It is an antithesis to China. China being an autocratic state. It makes sense if China works with the SSE or the junta. India needs to show it's something different, right? As the region's democracy, it makes sense for India to work with the democratic side in Myanmar. So it wouldn't be out of line for India to open formal channels of communication with, for example, the national unity government. So I would recommend two-step process, which is India work with regional players in Myanmar, the CNF, the Arakan Army, the PDFs, etc., and also work with a pan-regional or inter-regional kind of national actor, which is the National Unity Government or NUG. These are the two levels that India needs to build relationships with now. It's high time India does that. And it is only by doing that that India can effectively counter China. And the last point that I'll make is that China is already also working with other groups. It's not just China's relationship with Myanmar is not as simple as we think, which is that it's not just working with the Myanmar military. It has very deep linkages with the northern groups. A lot of what you saw in the last few months, offensives in the north, has to do with Chinese interests. It is incumbent on India to build similar interests along the Western Front. And in a way, that is beneficial, number one, for the people of Myanmar, is what I would argue. Rest, as I said, I'm grateful for this panel. And I hope you don't mind my frankness. I was a little disappointed when FCC platformed the pro SSC individual a month back, but I'm glad this happened. I thought this should have happened before. And I'm happy this platform was given to Nue and so to express what you feel and your plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. What do you think the government of India should be doing with the national unity government? Do you think the European Union and several European countries have recognized the national unity government? And I think several governments are, non-governmental agencies, maybe helping the rebels and the three brotherhood army. So to make sure that China does not exploit the situation for its benefit at India's cost, and to make sure that our facilities, the projects which we are doing in Myanmar are, restarted and all that. What do you think India should be doing with the NUG? Do you think we should recognize them? That would upset the existing military junta. Do you think there should be elections there? And what is it that India can possibly do in a given situation when the army's brutalities are very well publicized and you have more than 1 million Rohingyas living, in pathetic conditions in Bangladesh, and so where does India go from here?
I think we should the EU-US model of recognition of the NUG. I don't have much hopes from that. Why? Because I feel it's just notional recognition. The beyond the sanctions, I don't think the EU and US have been able to help the NUG in real terms. I mean, the US enacted the Burma Act, but nothing really happened after that. So let's not follow that model. I, I'm proposing a very regionally specific, context specific model for India, which is you don't have to go out in the open or formally and openly, publicly, if you don't want, recognize the NUG, but work with the NUG extensively uh, behind closed doors, I would say. And not just for the sake of recognizing NUG that we recognize NUG, but to work towards providing humanitarian aid to the people of Myanmar, especially along the border. And number two, to secure India's own interests. And why I say this is because the recent meeting between the Mizo MP and the Arakan Army shows that that non-SSC actors are crucial, are absolutely critical for India for the protection of Indian assets in Myanmar in that sense. So I think it's time because so far we have been deferential to the juntas in many ways sensitivities, political sensitivities, but that hasn't worked for us. Is my argument. India has always been risk averse. I feel way too risk averse in its policy. India has a certain leverage in Myanmar, leverage over the junta. I think it's punching below its weight. India needs to punch at par to its weight or above its weight and take some risks. We see China taking those risks for its own interests. India needs to do the same. Is my short argument.
Do you think we should have a crack two kind of approach to the problem, informally work with the NUG and provide assistance. What do you think about that? So,
I'm not here to say what India should do, because India is the largest democracy and India knows what India is doing. I mean, India has been a great friend for the peoples of Burma, Myanmar throughout, starting from the liberation struggle for independence. But one, definitely, I agree with you that India should engage with various stakeholders. As I mentioned, there is no such central power in Myanmar, Burma, Myanmar. And they are emerging powers. They are regional stakeholders. Just for India's own interest, engage with them. When I say engage with them, it is not just allowing them to stay, to live in a isolated place. The representative, the ambassador of National Unity Government is in New Delhi. Allow him to speak whatever the policies of National Unity Government. There is a very broad umbrella of is called NUCC, composed of 28 groups, include of armed groups, political parties, the CSOs. They are there very much. Please allow them to articulate what they are struggling for. There are many things the government of India cannot do or might not be able to do. But Indian democracy, Indian parliamentarians, Indian NGOs, Indian
which is very specific. It just struck me when I was just recalling Nue's remarks, which is I would also urge the Indian government to allow UNHCR to open a refugee status determination office in Mizoram. Because, many of the refugees have to travel all the way to Delhi. Asylum seekers have to travel to Delhi to get that. And even after traveling to Delhi, there's no certainty that they will get a refugee status. In fact, even after they get a refugee card, there's no certainty that they will be able to avail everything, right? So, but at least having a presence in Mizoram will help the proximate asylum seekers who are there. And I understand UNHCR has a serious challenge of working in India because India is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention, so it's limited. It has a very limited mandate. But I would also urge UNHCR to lobby more seriously with the Indian government and to urge the Indian government to also consider this to expand the UNHCR's operational mandate as far as Myanmar refugees are concerned. Secondly, I would also take this platform to urge the Indian government to not to ensure that Myanmar refugees are not hounded as illegal immigrants. This is a very fundamental legal problem that we have because we don't have a refugee law. Uh, Refugees are treated according to the Foreigners Act. So refugees, anyone who enters a country without documents automatically, unfortunately, becomes an illegal immigrant. But it is on the executive discretion of the Indian government and, of course, state governments like Mizoram to treat refugees with a humanitarian, protection-centric framework. And I would urge New Delhi to ensure that Mizoram and Manipur and Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh, by the way, I think six Myanmar nationals were arrested in Arunachal Pradesh also last month. So, firstly, stop these detentions and arrests, and definitely stop forced deportations. If sending back happens, it has to happen on voluntary consent. There has to be full informed consent of the refugees. And I would seriously urge the Indian government or any state government to not hand them back over to the military. It's a violation of the customary international law of non-refoulement because they face a serious threat to life if they return to the military.
Being a free country and a democratic country, isn't it time for India to join the refugee convention and recognize refugees as refugees and not as illegal immigrants? You have 100,000 Tamils, Sri Lankan Tamils living in refugee camps in Tamil Nadu and all that. Don't you think we should be doing something like that?
Ideally, absolutely. My short answer is yes. We should ratify the Refugee Convention, but it's a very complicated issue. Every time we discuss this in various formats, a whole can of worms open. Why should we sign the Refugee Convention? We can have our own refugee law. So my point is, even if we don't ratify the Refugee Convention, India should have a religion agnostic refugee law, which applies to all asylum seekers, which is protection centric, humanitarian and protection centric, to recognize that uh, asylum seekers are coming into India not to violate criminal laws, but they're forced to come to India under extraordinary circumstances. So that recognition should be there in executive policy.
Okay, may I throw the session open to Q&A? Those of you who have questions to ask, kindly raise your hands. Wait for a microphone to come, identify yourself, and then ask the question. Sanjay?
You were talking about India joining international refugee what is that convention and all, but India can be more humane in its approach towards refugees. Forget about the way they are treating Rohingyas. They are sufferer. They are doubly suffer being victimized in India by India. I have done stories that they are in detention centers. Mother is in detention center. The young kids are out. The father is somewhere else. This kind of thing. So how very difficult as a citizen to uh, understand why the Indian government behaves in such a inhuman manner and dehumanize the victims, those who have come here with hope to survive. I think that the civil society in India is also not so proactive on this front, and particularly with this regime. I think the earlier regime was not so harsh on them. With this government being so religious centric and so nationalistic in its approach, it has become very difficult for refugees who come from outside to find some kind of a space, some kind of humanitarian space to exist. You feel that as a civil society, you can put uh, more pressure on the government, at least ignite their humanitarian, feelings.
Um, I, I, I think something very fascinating is happening in India today, which is humanitarianism. The idea of humanitarianism has been ring. Just the CA law is projected as actually a humane law, except it's for only those six religious groups. Majority. So we know that there is a sectarian boundary around that law. So there is a very strategic refashioning of the idea of humanitarianism to say that if you basically argue that why can't we have a humanitarian refugee law, you will be pointed towards the CA. See, Sharanarthis, we are giving them. So, this is a very new kind of development we are seeing in today's India. But generally, yes, the space for humanitarianism has shrunk, I feel. One of the first responses of the Indian government to the Myanmar refugee crisis, I think in May, was to ask the border states to shut the borders, seal the borders, and take refugees if only needed. And in extreme, like if they absolutely need shelter, otherwise turn them back. I think that was also the phrase that politely turn them back. That was the phrase that was used. So there is certainly a militarization of the borders in many ways, and I would say a protectionism. Virtual fences are being erected, if not physical. So that's one thing. But the problem with civil society intervention is that the space for civil society intervention is also shrinking, I feel. If you see the FCRA law that is being used to shut down NGOs who work on quote unquote sensitive issues, I would understand when an NGO avoids taking a position on that, because once the FCRA is cancelled, they lose their funding, etc. So many staff members within the organization suffer. So you can't even say why aren't you taking a stronger position. You understand. So I feel there is a shrinking and a clamp down on the civil society space to work on specifically on the refugee issue also. But even that, I know many civil society organizations, NGOs, and you would also know who are still working amongst all these difficult circumstances, working with refugees to provide them basic needs and services, to give them education, give them access to health, etc. So it's not that civil society is not doing work. In fact, it's always a dilemma. Should these civil society organizations publicly, pressure the government and risk losing whatever they're doing on the ground, or they should just silently keep doing their work? It's a difficult question, and honestly, these are times are such that I don't have such easy answers.
Friends, we have with us a very distinguished JNU professor, Professor Baladas Ghoshal. May I invite him to make his observations about the situation in Myanmar, what India could possibly do, and how he looks at the ongoing situation there. Thank you.
I think it's very difficult to add to what Somin has mentioned. See, it's easy, of course, to suggest so many things that India should do and shouldn't do. But you have to look also into the past experiences that India had encountered. Except in the case of East Pakistan or Bangladesh, I think India's humanitarian intervention had not succeeded very much in the past. So I think the government should also be constrained in terms of its past experiences of dealing with such interventions or, kind of any involvement with such things. That's number one. Number two is that even in the case of Myanmar, I think India had some experiences in the past also. For example, during the 90s, India was really a great champion of the democratic groups. And that policy did not really bring about much dividend during that period. So I think the government is also shy in terms of intervening in such areas. And second thing, Anshuman mentioned about humanitarian spaces sort of, reducing. Again, unless in the case of East Pakistan, in Bangladesh, 71, during that time, it was a question of security of India. I myself was involved in that in 71 thing, given shelter to many of those, Bangladeshi things. I myself come from that part lived in Pakistan. So the situation was quite different. Security, humanitarian, and a whole lot of other issues were involved during that time. So India was able to, and it was also a question of Mrs. Gandhi's legitimacy of that period, that she wanted to build up a legitimacy on certain achievements. She was very reluctant to actually intervene. It was only after the change in the Soviet attitude towards the thing that it changed. Now, Myanmar itself is a very complicated case at the moment. I myself had written in the past, talking about how India should do it. But I think looking at the situation at the moment, it becomes very difficult to also choose how it should go about. It's all right to talk about the larger part of the countries under the control of the rebel forces, the military is on the defensive and all that. But in the reality, one should also think about the real situation there. To what extent these groups, the diverse groups, Somin himself had mentioned that not one group, varieties of groups are emerging as emerging power there. Now, how would, it's all right to talk about the common front at the moment because there's a common enemy, so-called the army is the common enemy. But to what extent there are really unity amongst all those groups? In the past, there had been many attempts to bring these groups together, but they have not come together in that sense. ASEAN, which is very much involved with the problem, they have not been able to come out with a. Of course, one might say that ASEAN is constrained by its policy of consensus. So, with the result, they can't take any decision. And any kind of multilateral approaches has even become redundant. One has to take into account the individual approaches or something. So, on the one hand, I think that India, being a largest democracy, it has a commitment. It should really get involved with some kind of support. But on the other hand, when you look at the realities of the situation, these varieties of interest are emerging. To what extent those interests are going to gel with the interests of India? It's all right to say that now they're all united, so India's position, democratic position, will improve if they really come into some kind of an understanding of humanitarian approaches. So I think it's a very complicated situation, and I find it difficult to give any, definite comment that we should do this or that. I think India is also has its own constraints. On the one hand, Myanmar is an important factor in our foreign policy, and it's also in our security. And like Anshuman said, that the military government is not giving us any security because they're never actually, even in the past, they've never actually looked after the interests of India. They looked after their own interests, and their own differences also had influenced their policy making towards India. So it's very difficult to really come to any definitive statement on this. I think it's still time for this struggle to come to a definite shape. So far, it has not, to my mind, that you can really zero in that here is a group who is going to win the situation and they have to be supported immediately. But India should not, India cannot really make any decision right at this moment. That's my impression. India will wait for some other time in order to really come into any kind of definitive policy towards the country. And have really, it's not, a few years. I have been teaching Myanmar, Burma from the early 70s. So I've seen the politics of the country in which direction it is moving. And it's a very cesspool kind of a thing. It becomes very difficult to come to any kind of understanding. Today, one group is going in one direction. Tomorrow, there's another group going into another direction, depending on their own interests and the way they're able to work out some kind of a position. So I think one has to really wait till a new, till a definitive situation. And this control part of it is still quite debated, that whether really the actual control is there. And today, I don't think the military is going to uh, withdraw all of a sudden. It will give its last bite before it goes. It will go eventually, but I think it will go. It will give its last sort of. It will take its last chance at least air action against rebels, and that is the weakest point for this group because they don't have any support for air power as yet, at least until some other countries come and support them. So I think it's in a very stalemate situation. And I would hesitate to really suggest any definitive move on the part of India. But one thing is, one should agree that humanitarian, support to the refugees and people who have already been inside the country, that they should be taken care of, and at least it should be seen that they can live a life of dignity. That's my impression.
Thanks very much, Professor, for your observations. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is to So Mint. You have been writing from Vikas Puri or Uttam Nagar side. We have been sharing here. Now, my question to you is because she has said education is a problem in India. If some sort of Myanmar people take education abroad and they become, something, because education is everything. Everything comes later, education comes first. So, how far you know that uh, Myanmar students are going either to Thailand or other countries and taking part in education? Is education important in Myanmar culture? This is my question.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. That is what we could do now. Investing education, investing future, particularly in the young people. We don't know. We don't know the future, the future exactly is. But definitely, if we have education in the young people, that will be better for themselves and for the society and for the country. What we are doing in not this part in India or India Myanmar border, what we are doing in Thailand Myanmar border, we have set up a training institute in current state, which is not controlled by Myanmar military. The training institute basically trains the young journalists who are from different parts of Myanmar, who have chance to sit and learn for 2 months on journalism, reporting, fact check, so that they become professional. Then they go back to their respective places, wherever, so that they can do their profession. That is one. Then some of them, what we do is we have an MOU with some of the universities in Thailand, like Chiang Mai University. Some of them have privilege and access to go for non-degree education course in those universities. That means, I mean, there are 6 million, 5 to 6 million Burmese, and many of them are young people in Thailand. We cannot do this for 6 million, 5 million. At least we can do for 1,000, maybe in 2 years and 3 years. That is what we could do. I think that is where India has a very good education, and I'm sure that some of the young, I mean, the kids have access to the Indian schools. Some of them. I mean, we have 6,000 refugees in New Delhi. I'm sure it will be a few hundreds if they can go to the educational opportunities in India. But that is what we could do to provide scholarships, to provide opportunities. I mean, one is formal education. There are difficulties like Myanmar education is 10 standard, here 12 standard. But that also can have a sort of solutions to break through. But at least non-degree educational courses. The issue is, it is not that there is no organization or no support system. There are some NGOs trying, but the demands and the needs are much more than what what is there not right now. So we should focus it. We should increase the support. We should collaborate each other so that this education, at least for now, and if you, I think the situation is always it cannot be always down. It will be up. It will be better. It can be a better future. So, but at least for the next 4 5 months, 4 5 years, let's give education to the young people, particularly women, kids, children.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is actually for Mr. Soming. Anyone else also, please feel free to add. Uh, before the coup, Myanmar was really in the news for the Rohingya crisis mostly. Uh, Inside Myanmar, what Myanmar government or military council has used the term Bengali to refer Rohingya, which totally alienate the Rohingyas in Myanmar. But inside Myanmar, at the same time, most media group, including Mizima, has used the term very often. But you have partially answered this question that Mizima is no more like before uh, 2021 coup. Uh, but in recent days, you have also mentioned that the Rakhine state is mostly under control of Arakan army. But recently, we have also seen Arakan army is using the term Bengali to refer Rohingyas. Uh, at the same time, NUG is using Rohingya, although NUG doesn't have any impactful power in Myanmar. But while we talk about an inclusive and federal democracy in Myanmar, maybe in future, if that's happening, Rakhine, Arakan army or all the major groups who are now actively fighting against the military will have very much impact in policy making. So given that fact, how do you see the inclusion of Rohingya, the real democracy or federal democracy of Myanmar? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. One, I will speak for Mizima, which is an independent media, which was basically set up in New Delhi and try to survive as an independent media also. Now we have been for the 26 last 26 years until 2021. We struggled a lot. That was a limited space. It was not democracy. There was a military, very much as I mentioned, with all these veto powers, and there was a semi-democratic government, which was a popular government. I will give you example. One, we had a free-to-air television channel. It's called Mizima TV channel. That we got the license to operate free-to-air TV channel from the Ministry of Information. That was the limited space that we had. That was we were not allowed to operate freely independently. We had to get the license from the Ministry of Information and work with the Ministry of Information to operate this TV channel. The issue of Rohingya. So, and we also broadcast. I will give you example. We broadcast our channel carry the BBC Burmese program. So the Rohingya stories, particularly before 2016, 17, 18, there were many Rohingya stories. So whenever we use Rohingya, the word Rohingya in our TV channel, we have threats, we have we have complaints, formal complaints, even from the Ministry of Information of that government, saying that if you continue to use Rohingya in our TV channel, the word Rohingya, the license will be revoked. So what we have to do? We have to continue our work with that limited space. So what we had to kind of a compromise or whatever adjust is that we use the Rohingya, but we have to uh, run a or put at a sentence that the word Rohingya is not recognized by the government of Myanmar. That's how we have to operate it. 2021 coup that changed. We don't have these restrictions anymore. We are doing satellite. We are broadcasting our TV channel, and we are free to use what we the people's identify themselves. We are using Rohingya. Same thing if we talk about national unity government. Of course, the question is very much the citizenship, the question of citizenship as well. When, how, whether the Rohingyas will be given the rights of citizenship. That is the question very much. I don't know about this, what is their policy is, but what I know is the Deputy Minister of the Human Rights Ministry of National Unity Government himself is a Rohingya. So I could at least say the majority Burmans have come to terms that Rohingyas were oppressed probably by themselves as well as a majority people, but they are also they were also oppressed. I mean, the Burmans are also oppressed by the current military. So they have this more understanding of how people were oppressed because they saw they themselves became the being oppressed. And so there were even some leaders, I remember some leaders of this democratic movement have publicly apologized that they didn't what they were the way the Rohingyas were treated. So I think it's a question. Let's see. I think definitely Rohingyas have to be recognized in the. It has to be a part of the future, whatever the setup is, with dignity, with equality, with their rights.
Since you mentioned about the Rohingya issue, I have a question to you. Actually, the Kofi Annan report that was about to be submitted suggested that since there are reservations about the term Rohingya, what Kofi Annan had suggested that they should be treated as Muslims, and they should be treated Muslims, and they should be given the rights of citizenship and whatever other communities are entitled to the citizenship. Because the question of uh, you know treating Rohingyas as a separate ethnic group entails also that Rohingyas are also entitled to ask for a separate state. Because in Myanmar, states are known by their ethnicities, Shans, Kachins, Karens, like. So Rohingya can also. And obviously the government was sensitive to a separate state right on the border of Bangladesh, and which is a Muslim state, and where radical elements are also there. Now, this Kofi Annan report, the day it was submitted, there was an attack on that police station. I forget the date now, some 16th, it was that date. Uh, now, so the whole process of reconciliation, at least some form of compromises, that were also eliminated by the fact that, that station was attacked, number of police stations attacked, and a couple of people were killed because of that. So I think it is not always that the government itself is also on the wrong foot, but some of these groups also should have understood the reality of the situation and adapt a much, a process of change to, time, a period of time that needed, that once they could be recognized as a Muslim group and given certain amount of rights, they could also, in course of time, they could also ask for other rights as well. But I think this process was sabotaged, to my mind, maybe by rebel groups. I mean, within the Rohingyas, uh, what could be, I don't know, the rationale behind that. And that also gave a handle to the military at that time to carry on its genocide against the Rohingyas. So, my question to you is actually, what was the impression of general public about Kofi Annan's recommendations?
One Myanmar military, not I mean throughout, is not only targeting Rohingyas alone. Myanmar military has been targeting minorities. I mean, that's how you see all these minority groups taking up armed struggle for decades and fighting back and getting stronger and stronger. So that time, Kofi Annan report, it was the Myanmar military never wanted to relinquish power. First of all, so Rohingya issue was a very good issue for them to divide their society, to divide their communities. There are evidence and facts that, in fact, many of the Myanmar military commanders in Rakhine State supported some of the Rohingyas groups or individuals before, long before. But when they wanted to divide the society, they basically used this issue again and attack. So this genocide or the attack against particular community, you cannot see as standalone. They have been using this divide and rule, one community against another, to have this Burma majority Buddhist fundamentalist rule over the case. That is what the basic essence, basic core of Myanmar military from that time until now. So Rohingyas were victims, the ethnic minorities were victims. Now Burma majorities were also victims. So I think we have to see the way Myanmar military try to control or maintain their power using this divide and rule of one community against another. Of course, there are questions of minorities within minorities. There are questions of federalization within a particular or within these. There are questions. I mean, there are attempts going on. But it is the fact that Myanmar military has been all this throughout, attacking and if you ask me who actually sabotaged this attempts to reconciliation or attempts to having to living together, it was Myanmar military and it is Myanmar military even now today. Why they have this conscription law? Now they are targeting the Rohingyas, young people now. I mean, they do others, they target other, but they are now taking out the Rohingyas, young people, very specifically, and put them in front of the pedals, fighting against the Rakhines. That is what they do all throughout. One community against another. Of course, that didn't they didn't succeed.
May I now invite Simran to propose a vote of thanks and present mementos to our.
Apologies. Am I allowed to make one short comment?
Yeah, sure, please.
Just to what Sir said and so said. So, with all due respect, I think it's unfair to blame the Rohingya community for what happened to them in 2017. Why I say that is because, firstly, Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army (ARSA), the group that attacked, doesn't represent the entire Rohingya population. Uh, Large parts of the population have, in fact, categorically rejected the group. Secondly, the Rohingyas have been facing what they are facing since about more than 60 years now. If you say the 1982,
You're saying is I know that. The thing I'm saying,
so if I may
you are
complete.
in a difficult situation. You have to be very careful not to give
Sir,
so it was used as a handle by Amlyo. He used it as a used to tactically wipe out the.
let's assume that's true, but then the blame lies on the military and the military alone. Absolutely. The Rohingyas were systematically disenfranchised since the 1982 citizenship law. In 2012, again, there was a disenfranchisement drive. Uh, they were systematically denied the very right, a very basic right of self recognition. You said you're Muslims, you're Bengalis, you are not Rohingya. Now, to deny someone's existence in that manner, there can be no bigger criminal act, in my view, a political criminal act. So that's what I wanted to say. And regarding, so I think just one small comment I would make. Um, there is absolutely no doubt that all groups have certainly faced even systematic disenfranchisement. Even, for example, the Chins, in my conversation with them, they've told me how they have been uh, alienated from their land, particularly because of their identity, the Chin identity. But I think the level of violence which the Rohingya community has seen since 2017, it's off the roof, I feel. The scope, the quality of the quantity of violence and the nature of violence and the forced expulsion and the denial of identity, I feel is extraordinary. So I think that I feel should be recognized. Thank you. That's all.
Simran?
From all of us here at the Foreign Correspondents Club, let me thank Anshuman, uh, the lady Noev, and Soyment for this very interesting discussion. And it's been a very participative audience we've had here. And this has been streamed live on the Twitter and Facebook page of FCC. And you can always go back and check the archives if you ever need to visit the discussion. Thank you once again for being here. Thank you.
She will now present mementos to all of you. Please hold on for a minute.